Okay, everybody, here we go. Are you ready? It's me, Gregory Mannarino. It is Thursday, January 5th, 2023. I still have 22 in my head. I'm going to screw that up at one point, so just don't hold that against me. I'm going to say 22. I don't know, maybe even tomorrow, but we'll see how this plays out. People, all right, so here's the story right now. We found out this morning, to my shock, and I'm sure yours as well, that the global economy continues to contract. Now, what I find somewhat disturbing here is why is it, again, you don't hear a word from any of the propaganda ministries about why this is actually happening, how it's central banks, again, what are they doing? They're crushing the consumer, which is, of course, hurting demand. So what does that do? It contracts the global economy. What did we find out just yesterday? Right out of the mouth, right out of the freaking pie hole of the freak show, the ultimate freak show, the Federal Reserve, that they're expecting unemployment to get much, much worse, inflation to remain sustained despite the fact that they continue to raise rates. We also heard from Lex Luthor, you know who I'm talking about, Neil Kashkari here from the Federal Reserve is saying, oh, yes, the Fed's going to maintain its pace of rate hikes moving forward, you see, because it's working so well. And it actually is working completely well. What you and I are absolutely clear on is the issue of inflation is not getting better. I mean, right out of their own mouth, they're explaining that inflation is going to remain high for the foreseeable future. Now, this is not just the Federal Reserve. This is also the European Central Bank, Bank of Scotland, you name it, all the central banks, same thing. They're all involved in the same nightmare, and the nightmare is being pushed and forced upon the people of the world as they continue to move closer. I'm talking about central banks moving closer and closer and closer to their end game, to their goal to be the owners of the entire world. And as I said yesterday, and I did read the comments, and I can see how this bothered a lot of you as well. It's an astonishing thing how central banks have the power to create cash out of nothing with no oversight, and they can buy anything they want. Imagine you, for example, all right, you had a printing press in your house, or you had the ability to add digits to a screen that miraculously appeared in your bank account. You're allowed to do this in mass to whatever degree you want. You could buy anything you want. This is what central banks are doing to fulfill their end game, to own the entire world. And meanwhile, you got the distractions and the deceptions. This whole thing with the House Speaker, focus on this. Don't focus on what's going on around you. It's always the same story. And whenever you see something like that, you know there's another game being played. And unfortunately, that's the way it's going to go forever here until this whole thing actually just kind of melts down. Now, speaking of that, you and I have witnessed a pretty interesting phenomenon over the last several days. That is, some entity out here, central banks, buying huge amounts of debt. We watch global bond yields drop as this debt was being bought up. Now, this seems to have reversed just a little bit. Let's see how this plays out. So what we have now is global bond yields coming up just a little bit. And this is hitting the markets, the equity markets. Right now, for example, trading doesn't start for about 32 minutes from the time I am doing this. You got stock futures lower across the board. Okay. Again, the illusion of stability must be maintained or the market's just going to hate it. And you know this. It's interesting how you and I can follow this in real time by watching the action here in the debt market, watching the 10-year yield, the relative strength of the dollar, and the MMRI. This morning, the MMRI is sitting at about 244. Seems like the new line in the sand is 250. So let's see what they pull off. So as I said, stock futures are lower right now. You got global bond yields, coming up a little bit. You got the relative strength of the dollar higher this morning. This is fear. Again, there's some kind of fear here in the market. And, we need to just see how it plays out, because here's the situation. Global demand is being crushed by design, obviously, by central banks who are continuing to raise rates. And it's not helping. Inflation continues to rise. Here's another thing I want to hear from you about. This is Economics 101. Look it up for yourself. So we understand that we have this mechanism going on since the last meltdown, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars floating around the world as central banks have propped up the markets and they're buying everything. Now, Economics 101 dictates that when a central bank does, the central banks collectively do this, you have all these extra bills in whatever form they exist chasing the same or lesser amount of goods, and henceforth why you get inflation. But what central banks have chosen to do is raise rates instead of contracting the money supply. Okay, why is it that, in your opinion, that you never hear a word about how this scheme here of central banks to reinflate a housing bubble, to reinflate a stock market bubble by creating all this cash out of thin air? They don't just go over Economics 101. As I said, all these extra bills chasing the same or a lesser amount of goods. Speaking about a lesser amount of goods, we found out that U.S. imports dropped 6.4% and exports dropped 2%. On top of that, and I hate even talking about this because it's absolutely propaganda, is the initial jobless claims number for last week came out lower than expected, 204,000. Meanwhile, corporate layoffs are skyrocketing. You see, they can't have you actually realize what's going on here, and it's all the lies, all the distractions, all the deceptions that you and I already know is going to take place. But I tell you something, when I look forward here and peer a little into my crystal ball into 23. I mean, look, the writing is on the wall. I think you and I are well aware of that. Central banks are not going to stop crushing the consumer, making sure that they destroy whoever's left in the middle class as they fulfill their endgame to wipe out an entire class of people and create this new two-tier society that you and I knew would come from over 10 years ago. This new feudal system, it's in full swing here. More people being made dependent on the system, on their system. Everything is going exactly how central banks want it to go. And there's no other way out of it. There's no way around it. There's not enough people like you and I who are at least trying to raise awareness. Nothing. It's an incredible thing. You walk around your neighborhoods, and it's my neighborhood here. First of all, there's nobody in the streets anymore. There's not even children outside. They're all locked up inside their houses as they're supposed to be, being separated from other people, the divide and conquer. It starts at a very young age these days. Kids now stuck on whatever toys they're playing with. They're not outside playing, baseball or whatever it is. Me, you would never find me in my house when I was a kid. I was always outside doing some kind of sports activity, riding my skateboard, roller skates, hanging out with my friends, building go-karts in my yard out of wood I would find, stuff like that. All the stuff that I'm sure a lot of you did that are around my age. Now it's gone. People are being conditioned to be separated from each other into this virtual world that doesn't even exist. It's unbelievable. And all it is doing here is dumbing down the population, again, from an extremely young age, and forcing them into, again, a world that is not real, this fantasy land of digital games and stuff like that. Because the world we live in right now, as you're all well aware, nothing is what it seems to be. So how they program the minds of children from a very, very young age is interesting. And it just sets up how the rest of their entire lives are going to play out. They lose their apps, they lose social skills, they become blunted, muted. I talk to some of my friends here who have children, and I'll be honest with you, they're all, they don't even have a clue at all. I think the children of today are a hell of a lot more dumb than the people of my generation. They lost that ability because they're being stuck again in some kind of fantasy world that doesn't even exist. And they're being taught history in a way that is actually not true. And this is another phenomenon that's going around here. The public school system what they're teaching children today, their versions of history. They're shaping the minds of these kids, and it all comes from, again, the ruling body of the world, which is, of course, the central banks, who are the government. Anyway, so in summary right now, stock trading doesn't start for about, let's see, now we got about 27 minutes. Stock futures lower across the board. Gold and silver under pressure. Bitcoin under pressure. Crypto's under a little pressure as well. Crude oil getting a bid here. Dollar relative strength lower. Bond yields slightly higher. MMRI came up a little bit. That's the story. That's where we are. And look, for you and me, this is just too easy. We're not going to deviate at all from our plan. Betting against the debt, becoming our own central bank, holding hard assets, physical, silver, in my opinion, and please do your own research on this, the most undervalued asset in the world. The debt bubble continues to be fueled. It won't stop. Central banks are going to continue to inflate despite the dog shit they're going to fist feed you via the mainstream channels. But you all know this anyway. All right, people, look, this guy here, as always, loves you a lot, and I mean that from the heart. Please share the video. Please comment, and I will see you later.